I'm Alaila Muncada from BSN English Topi. Today we will be discussing about the novel and short stories in Japan. So without further ado, let's get started. The novel in Japan is both very old and completely modern. In the Edo period, novels can be appeared, but most of them are a purely collection of short stories. It says it is designed to appeal to the merchant and other artisan classes in particular. They may have been short, well-undeveloped plots, but they were long on entertaining. The novel in Japan is more autobiographical than in the West. This type of autobiographical novels gives insight not only the personal lives of the writers, but also the stresses, stains, and moral of life. Japanese literature was little known outside Japan, but since 1945 it became popular. Novels and reading in general are so popular in Japan that in terms of quantity reading, they may put to shame their counterparts outside the country. So let's move on to the first novel entitled Snow Country. Before we start with the story, let's have a short background of the author. The author of the Snow Country is Yasunari Kawabata. He was a Japanese novelist and short story writer whose fair, lyrical, subtly shaded prose words. He was born on June 14, 1899 in Osaka, Japan. He died on April 16, 1972. He was the first author to receive the Nobel Prize for Literature in 1968. So now let's move on to the story itself. The Snow Country tells about a love story between Shimamura, Tokyo Dilettante, and Kumako, a geisha. The novel starts with the central character, which is Shimamura. Shimamura was traveling to a small town in Japan's Snow Country. Shimamura was a ballet critic from Tokyo, but in reality, he lacks of knowledge to his field. Shimamura's destination is a hot spring resort, which he was hoping to find the geisha that he encountered to his first visit. The geisha that he is looking for is Kumako. Kumako is conflicted in her relationship with Shimamura, which becomes uncertain and inconvenient over time. Shimamura was concerned that Kumako is being attached to him, but at the same time, he continues to visit Kumako to spend time with her. As the story progresses, it tells that Shimamura is equally and passionately drawn by Yoko because of her virginity, and that's why Kumako befriended her. Shimamura and Yoko had an affair, and after that, Yoko dies in a burning old theater, and Kumako attempts to save her. When she saves Yoko, he embraces her in her arms, while Shimamura falls and she senses the Milky Way flowing inside her with aurora. So now let's have a background of the story. So the story Snow Country, it is a star tale of a love affair between a Tokyo dilettante and a provincial geisha that takes place in the remote hot spring town of Izawa. Snow Country, published in 1948 as Yukiguni, the work was begun in 1935 and completed in 1937, with a final version completed in 1947. It deals with the psychological, social, and erotic interaction between an aesthete and a beautiful geisha is set against the natural beauty and imagery of a remote area of Japan. Now let's move on to the character of the novel. So the story have three main characters. The first one is Shimamura, which is a Tokyo dilettante and a ballet critic. Next one is Kumako. Kumako is a geisha, and Yoko. Yoko is the girl, um, Yoko is the girl that taking care of a ailing man named Yukio. And that is a snow country. Now, let's have the second novel titled The House of Sleeping Beauties. The novel explores many feelings focusing on memory, death, old age, eroticism, innocence, and etc. The House of Sleeping Beauties is a novella by Yasunori Kawabata in 1961, the same author of The Snow Country. The House of Sleeping Beauties focuses on Yoshio Iguchi, age 67, who visits an inn at a Japanese hot spring resort in order to sleep with one or another beautiful young woman. The establishment caters to elderly gentlemen who have lost their sexual powers. And the rules of the place is explicitly forbid a customer to initiate sexual contact. A girl is drugged, stripped naked, and put to bed in a room hung with red velvet curtains before an old man sees her. And she remains asleep until the customer leaves the next morning. The 5 chapters of Yasunori Kawabata's novella corresponds to Iguchi's 5 visits to the inn. They trace his search through memories prompted by the presence of each of the 6 girls whom he sleeps, for understanding of his own imperfect nature and for acceptance of his eventual death. Iguchi's 5 visits in the inn occur from autumn to midwinter during a single year, reinforcing the metaphysical thrust of the novel. The girls next to whom he sleeps are alive, responsive to stimulus, but heavily drugged that he cannot awaken them. Iguchi sees them as corpses. He calls their sleep a form of death, sensitive to the color, texture, and the scent of each girl's body. He finds the experience of flying to the girl's body a stimulus to his memory. The patterning of Iguchi's recollections seems random, prompted by the process of association causes him to think, for example, the scent of a nursing mother when he joins the first girl in bed one stormy autumn evening. In fact, Iguchi's memories run roughly parallel to the stages of human life. His thought during his evening with the first girl relates to innocent, new life and birth. The things Iguchi contemplates during his final evening in the inn, when one time he has 2 companions, center of death, life, final experience. So now let's have Junichiro Tanizaki. So he was one of major writers of modern Japanese literature and perhaps the most popular Japanese novelist after Natsume Soseki. Some of his works present a shocking role of sexuality and destructive erotic obsessions. He was born on July 24, 1886 and died on July 13, 1965. So the story that we will be tackled about is The Makioka Sisters. It's a novel by Tanizaki that was serialized from 1943 to 1948. It follows the lives of the wealthy Makioka family of Osaka, focusing on the family's attempts to find husband for the 3rd sister Yukiko. So now we will be discuss further the story. The Makioka Sister is a story of 4 sisters in a wealthy Japanese merchant family that is declining fortune in the years leading up to World War II. The story focuses on the viewpoint of Sachiko, the second oldest sister. She is very concerned with the 2 younger sisters, Yukiko and Teiko, who live most of the time with Sachiko. Yukiko is a shy and quiet woman, is well past the age at which women in her class should be married, but no suitable husband has been found for her. Each prospective suitor has been either ruled out of the main house for something in his background or refused by Yukiko herself. Teiko, the youngest sister, cannot marry before Yukiko, but as a young woman, Teiko eloped with her lover, Okubata, causing a minor scandal before she returned home and actually got married. The family struggles with maintaining the proper outward appearances, dealing with the seemingly docile but stubborn Yukiko and increasingly independent Teiko, who begins to see other men while she waits for a husband for Yukiko. Despite several attempts to match Yukiko with a husband, something always seems to break down the negotiation. When Yukiko herself sours an ongoing negotiation by refusing to meet with a suitor, Sachiko grows to resent her for her apparent ingratitude. Teiko disturbed the main house by announcing her intention to learn sewing and make clothing for a living. The main house insists that she either come live with them in Tokyo and wait to be married or be disinherited. Teiko decided to leave Sachiko's house and live with her own. Marriage is finally made with Yukiko with a man named Minaki, a son from a noble Tokyo family. During the negotiation, handled with Tenosuke, Sachiko learns that Teiko is pregnant and the father is the bartender named Miyoshi. Ever concerned with ruining Yukiko's chances of marriage, the family hides Teiko's pregnancy, and her child dies after the birth. Nevertheless, Yukiko is married with Miyoshi, and the novel closes with Yukiko sets off from Tokyo to be married. And that is the story of the Makioka sister. Now, let's tackle the themes and meanings of the story. There are blood, typhoon, sex scandal, illness, death, family dishonor, but all these things pass in the flow of time and human purpose. Now, let's be more familiar with the characters. The first one is Chiruku. She is the oldest sister and the main mistress of the main house. Sachiko is the second older sister. Yukiko is the third older sister, and she cannot marry because of her stubbornness. Next one is Taiko, the youngest of them all. Next one is Tatsubo, Chiruku's husband. Next one is Tenosuke, Sachiko's husband and the one who handled the negotiation between Yukiko and her husband. Etsuko is Sachiko and Tenosuke's husband. Next one is Okubata, the man who eloped with Teiko. Next one is Minaki, the future husband of Yukiko. And Miyoshi, the one who got married to Teiko. And that's the story of the Makioka sister by Junichiro Terizaki. Now, let's have our next author, Yukio Mishima. Kimitake Hiroka, also known as Yukio Mishima, was a Japanese author, poet, playwright, actor, model, film director, nationalist, and founder of the Tatenokai. Mishima is considered one of the most important Japanese author of 20th century. Now we will discuss The Sea of Fertility. The Sea of Fertility is written by Yukio Mishima and published in Japanese in 1965 to 1970 as Hojo no Ume, and widely regarded as his most lasting achievement. Each 4 parts, Spring Snow, Runaway Horses, The Temple of Dawn, and The Decay of the Angel is set in Japan. The main timeline of the story stretches from 1912 to 1975. The viewpoint of all 4 books is that of Shigekumi Honda, a law student in Spring Snow, and become a welterweight judge in Decay of the Angel. Each of the novels depict what Honda comes to believe are successive reincarnation of his school friend Kiyowaki Matsuwagi, and Honda's attempt to save them from the early deaths to which they seem to be condemned by karma. This result in both personal and professional embarrassment for Honda and eventually destroys him. And here are the friends' successive reincarnation. Kiyuaki Matsuwagi, a young aristocrat, Isauri Numa, a nationalist and violent extremist, Yinchan, an indolent Thai princess, Tori Yasunaga, a manipulative and sadistic orphan. The book deals with a pervading sense of change, an important theme when reflecting upon Mishima's attempt, coup d'etat. And that's the short summary of The Sea of Fertility. Now that we finished the novel The Sea of Fertility, let's move on to the next novel that written by Osamu Dazai. Let's have a short background of Osamu Dazai. Osamu Dazai. He was a Japanese author who is considered one of the foremost fiction writers of 20th century. Numbers of his most popular works, such as The Setting Sun and No Longer Human, are considered modern day classic in Japan. He was born on June 19, 1909 and died on June 13, 1948. Osamu Dazai is also famous because of his obsession for suicide. And now, let's move on to the novel The Setting Sun. The Setting Sun. It was published in 1947, is set in Japan after World War II. Principal characters are Kazuko, her brother Naoji, and their elderly mother. The story shows a family in a decline and crisis like many other families during this period of transition between traditional Japan and a more advanced industrial society. The author brings out a number of social and philosophical problems of that period. Now, let's more be familiar with the story, and I will be telling you about it. After World War II, a small aristocratic family in Japan has loss of their money. The family consists of 3 people, Kazuko, her brother Naoji, and their elderly mother. Naoji is a soldier in the South Pacific and is absent throughout much of the beginning of the novel. Kazuko was married once before and she divorced. The family's old house, Kazuko's mother eats ration food. Kazuko recalls a time when she tried to burn a snake eggs, thinking they were viper eggs. And it's revealed that at the time of Kazuko's father's death, there were many snakes present. Therefore, snakes have become ominous in her mother's eyes. The family eventually moves in the countryside. Kazuko begins to work in the field and she claims to be growing into forest woman. Naoji eventually returns and he became addicted to opium and he treated his mother and his sister cruelly. And then Kazuko finds Naoji's Moonflower Journal, which he wrote when he had narcotic poisoning. It consists of pages upon pages of unconnected groups about the world and how people always lie. Kazuko falls in love with a novelist named Mr. Yuhara. She writes 3 letters to him, claiming she loved a man named MC, while addressing the letter to him with 2 combinations of MC after his name, my Chekhov and my child, but sadly, he does not respond. Soon after, her mother diagnosed with tuberculosis. In their home, Kazuko sees a black snake on their porch, and we remember how her father died when one was present. She yells at it, claiming that he already felt the vengeance. But it does not retrieve, and eventually her mother dies. After an outing with Mr. Yuhara, 6 years she met him, Kazuko realizes that he also is not in best condition, and he calls him victim. And that morning, Kazuko finds out that her brother Naoji has committed suicide. His suicide note reveals his reason for not wanting to live anymore. Naoji believed that humans have the right to choose whether they want to live or die. He also confesses his weakness and anguish out of his birth in a novel class. But he protests the idea of all men is same, and insisting the Marxism affirms the priority of workers and the democracy of personal dignity. He also tells Kazuko about a woman he once loved, but he had difficulty writing her name. But then, he finally reveals that her name is Sugo. His final request is to be buried in her mother's hemp kimono, something he had wanted to wear the next summer. In the last chapter, Kazuko claims that people always leave her. The story ends with a letter with Mr. Yohara. She tells that she was pregnant and she will happily raise the child on her own. She has thrown away the old morality and is embracing a new revolutionary way of living. She says that they were a victim of transitional period and ends the letter addressing Mr. Yohara as MC, but this time as my comedian. And that's the story of The Setting Sun. Now let's have the short review of the story. The characters of the story is Kazuko, her brother Naoji, her elderly mother, and Mr. Yohara. The setting of the story is in Japan after the World War II. Setting Sun delineates the theme of that change is inevitable and must be faced, but is nevertheless painful. And that's the story of The Setting Sun. Now, let's move on to the sixth novel, which is written by Ryunosuke Atogawa. So, who is Ryunosuke Atogawa? Ryunosuke Atogawa, he was a Japanese writer active in the Taisho period. He is regarded as the father of the Japanese short story and Japan's premier literary award, the Atogawa Prize, is named after him. He died by suicide at the age of 35 through an overdose of barbican. Today we will be discussing his famous works titled In the Grove. Also known as Yabo no Naka, is a short story by Akutagawa. It first appeared in the January 1922 edition of the Japanese literature monthly Shindo. In the Grove is an early modern short story. It presents three varying accounts of the murder of a samurai, Kanazawa no Takehiro, whose corpse has been found in bamboo forest near Kyoto. The story asks this question: what is the truth? Who tells the truth? How is the truth classified? Akutagawa's ability to blend a feudal setting with deep psychological insight gives this story an ageless quality. So now let's move on to the story itself. The first section of the story comprises 4 testimonies given to a magistrate, a Kyoto City official who is investigating the mysterious death. The woodcutter who has found the body that morning speaks first, confirming the location of a deserted bamboo grove where he found the corpse, and describing the dried chest wound in detail. Next is a traveling Buddhist priest says he saw a man, a woman, a horse the day before the afternoon. Next one is the policeman who has testified that he has caught a bandit named Tajumaru, who is infamous for raping a woman around Kyoto. The policeman suggests that Tajumaru is responsible and that the magistrate should question him. The fourth testimony is delivered by the young woman's mother, who confirms that her daughter Masago and Masago's husband, Takehiro, the dead samurai, who would have been traveling in the hills the day before. She breaks down crying and worried for her missing daughter's safety. The narrative switches to Tajumaru's voice as he casually confesses to having killed Takehiro. He details how Masago's beauty led him to execute a plan. First, leading Takehiro into a bamboo grove under the pretense that he would sell him a treasure stolen from aristocrats' burial mound. Then, Tajumaru tied up Takehiro and raped Masago. To his surprise, she asked him to kill himself and her husband, saying she would be with the one who lived. Tajimaru angered Takehiro and challenged him to a sword fight. That ended in Tajimaru stabbing Takehiro in the chest on his 23rd thrust. Meanwhile, Masago escaped, so Tajimaru fled to the forest with Takehiro's weapon and rode Masago's horse until he backed off and subsequently caught. Tajimaru is resigned to his fate and asked to be executed by hanging at the tree outside the prison. The next account comes from Masago herself, delivered as a confession in Kiyomizu Temple. In her version of events, Masago details the contempt that she saw in Takehiro's eyes after Tajimaru raped her. She went to her husband's side, but Tajimaru kicked her on the ground and she lost consciousness. When she woke up, the bandit was gone, and she concluded that she and her husband needed to die now that her honor had been disgraced. She found the dagger that she'd been used to try to fend off Tajimaru, and with his permission, plunged the dagger into her husband's chest. She tried to stab herself in the neck and throw herself in the pond, but ultimately failed to commit suicide. After her rape and her failed attempt to commit joint suicide, Masago asked the religious authority to whom she speaks to what she should do. The final testimony is delivered by Takehiro's spirit as told through a medium. Takehiro's version contradicts Masago and Tajimaru's by claiming that Masago asked the bandit to kill her husband. United in shock at Masago's betrayal, the men discussed whether Tajimaru should kill her. This show respects make Takehiro forgive Tajimaru for his crimes. While Takehiro hesitated to answer the bandit, Masago escaped into the grove. Tajimaru untied the rope, binding Takehiro to a cedar tree, and fled away through the forest with Takehiro's weapon. Exhausted, Takehiro took Masago's dagger and stabbed himself. He slowly breathed as he watched the sunset over the grove. In the dark, an unidentified character walked up to him and withdrew the knife. The story ends with Takehiro saying he then sank to the darkness between lives. With no unifying narrative presence to clarify the contradictory events presented in the testimonies, the reader is left without a clear idea how Takehiro died, only possibilities. And that's the short summary of the story in the grove. Now let's have a short review of the story. Let's start with the characters. The characters are Takehiro, the samurai, who is dead; Masago, Takehiro's wife; Tajimaru, the infamous criminal; the magistrate, the Kyoto official who is investigating the mysterious death; the woodcutter who found Takehiro's body. Next one is the Buddhist priest, the policeman who caught Tajimaru, and Masago's mother. That's the character of the story. The next one is the setting. The story happened in Kyoto and in a deserted bamboo grove. Next one is the theme of the story: honor and death and rebirth. That's the theme of the story in the grove. And that is the story of In the Grove, written by Ryunosuke Akutami. Finally, we finished the topic about the novel and short stories of Japan. I hope you learned something about the most famous authors and their novels. And thank you for watching. I hope you have a good day.